and welcome to installment number 4 of the Lowdown, here with UFC lightweight banger Joe Lauzon. I'm Jack and Canarcio, taking a weekly look at the happenings inside the cage, not what fighters say or tweet, but what they do when the bell rings. And Joe, we're going to take a look and get folks ready for the rematch between Robbie Lawler and Johny Hendricks coming up on Saturday in Las Vegas. Highly anticipated, but I'll tell you, watching back the first fight from UFC 171 in March, I'm even more excited because I didn't really realize or remember how nip-tuck it was. What was your experience going back, your overall impressions watching this fight again?
Yeah, I'm excited about it. So I went back and watched it on Fight Pass last night, and the fight was way better than I remembered. I remember it being a good fight, but I kind of remembered it as, Robbie being a little bit more passive and kind of letting Johny come to him a little bit, but it really wasn't. It was really, really good. It was really close. I'm excited. I'm really excited for it.
And as you know, here on the Lowdown, we tend to perform autopsies on fights and get as specific and as closely broken down as we can with one of the richest minds in all of the UFC here. So let's take advantage of that. What we had here, Joe, was a Southpaw versus Southpaw style. Immediately out of the gate, both guys with that stance. So there wasn't that easy contrast that we've talked about in prior editions as far as how the orthodox fighter sets up things against the Southpaw and vice versa. Is it anything about both fighters having a Southpaw stance that makes any particular striking technique easier? I noticed Johny Hendricks using the leg kicks really liberally, and I wondered if the stance had anything to do with helping that.
Yeah, for sure. So everyone hates Southpaws. Righties hate Southpaws. Southpaws hate Southpaws, other Southpaws. And part of that comes down to the fact that you just don't see as many of them. In MMA, it's more common because there's so many guys that are wrestlers. So because they started wrestling, they started right foot forward. Southpaw stance, lead hand is the power hand, but everyone hates southpaws across the board, and it definitely changes things up. The general idea when a righty is fighting a southpaw is that you always want to step outside their lead foot. So in that case, you're constantly stepping to your left, stepping to your left, stepping to your left. Whereas if you're going against a righty, if you're stepping to your left, you're stepping into their power hand. So you don't want to do that. You generally circle away from the power hand, so you're circling to your right. So that's when you're a righty fighting a southpaw. When you get southpaw on southpaw, it's almost like it's righty on righty. You're constantly circling. Everything is just different. All the footwork is different. A lot of people kind of neglect the footwork aspect of fights. If I have good footwork, I'm always in the right spot. I'm always able to get my punches off. I'm always able to avoid their punches. So that footwork is a huge thing. A lot of times, when I'm watching fight tape or things like this, I'm hardly even watching the punches being thrown. I'm kind of paying attention to what they do with their foot, what they're doing with their feet. And it's a really big part of the whole thing. I think people kind of overlook it sometimes because the footwork is not what's knocking them out. It's usually the punch or the kick or the knee or the elbow. So the footwork is very different.
When you have two guys with the same stance, does the footwork kind of replicate each other? Do you find yourself circling and moving in the exact same way as your opponent, as opposed to it being easy to do the opposite?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely it becomes almost. I don't want to say a pissing contest, but almost like a pissing contest a little bit about just trying to stay one step ahead. So you step this way, they step this way. You step that way, they step that way. And it's all about who can get that very small, slight advantage on the other person and then take advantage with it.
Yeah, beautifully put. Yeah, I can definitely, when I notice, and I don't always notice, but when I do take the time to notice the similar stances, I do notice more of a cat and mouse game. It's less of one guy drawing the other guy out and more of a showdown of who's going to move first. And I think we saw that. What we did see a lot from Johny Hendricks was, like I said earlier, a liberal use of leg kicks. Most punch combinations, especially in the early rounds, he tended to finish off with leg kicks. And when he got away from that, his corner was very stern, deeper into the fight to make him go back to it. So talk about Hendricks' leg kicks on Lawler. I mean, is it an effective answer to the leg kick we saw in the first round to just haul off like Robbie Lawler did? It seemed like once the leg kick came, his idea was lefts and rights in that early going.
I think that was something that wasn't really expected. I don't think Robbie was really expecting all those leg kicks. I don't think that, I think up until that point, I don't think Johny is really known for throwing that many kicks.
Right.
So it was definitely something where, when Robbie goes and looks at tape, that was not something that he planned for. It's always something that could happen, and anyone can do any technique on any given night. But it's not something you game plan for, you were ready for. And Robbie ate a lot of kicks early on, which again that now affects your footwork and your power and everything else, and it just slows you way down.
Knowing Robbie Lawler's style and watching mixed martial arts as long as you have, Joe, why does it make sense to attack the leg if you're Johny Hendricks?
Attacking the leg is great because it takes away power, it messes with your footwork, and it's one of those things where you get a good leg kick or two in, like you're at such a big advantage right off the bat because now you're a little bit sluggish. Your confidence is gone because anytime you try to step hard on that foot, when you're aggressive, like you're heavy on that front foot. So someone starts chopping that leg out on you, it's really, really tough. It's a really good game plan.
Get more into that description of what it feels like to take the leg kicks and then try to plant on that foot. Because to me, having not fought, that always sounds to me like it's played up a lot, that you can soften up the leg. But it sounds like it's a real thing. The guy on the other end of that kick really is suddenly limited in what he can do.
It's weird. Like, so I always use the example of like a video game. Okay, so like let's say you're playing like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter, or some kind of game like that. And as you're playing, like you can see your health bar move down, but your character still works the same. When you have the little tiny sliver of health versus when you have like all of your health, like you still move the same. You're just as fast. You're just as powerful. Everything is just as good. It's just that you can tell that you're really, really close to finishing someone. I wish fighting were really like that, for as far as like I was, because like when you
get fight metric on that, power bars on both corners of the screen.
That's what we need. That's what we need. And
yep.
It's as you start to take damage, you slow down tremendously. Your coordination goes, your quickness goes, your power goes. All of the all of like your fine motor skills kind of go. It's like basically the equivalent of like anyone that's ever done like it's not like anything really strenuous. If you've ever done like mountain climbing or anything like that, like anything where like like your hands are just like they feel like they're seizing up. Like you can't move your hands. You know what I mean? You can't grab on anything. You're just so exhausted from like holding something. And it's the same thing. Your feet get just the same. So like you're trying to step and it's just your legs feel like concrete. It's just super crappy.
We saw Johny Hendricks in the first frame of the fight at UFC 171. Closed the distance early after that leg kick exchange in the circling with an overhand right. Then they clinched up. He shot a few takedowns. He actually shot quite a few takedowns in the early going of their first fight that Lawler completely rebuffed, completely stuffed. What did you notice in this fight about Robbie Lawler's takedown defense? It seems, I don't know, deceptively effective to me.
Well, everyone talks about how Johny is like this great wrestler. I think he's like a 4-time All-American and 2-time national champ. I think I remember from the broadcast. So he's got obviously he's got great wrestling. Robbie Lawler does not have those kind of credentials for wrestling. But what Robbie Lawler does have is tons and tons and tons of experience. Robbie's been fighting for a long time. Been fighting really good guys. Been in the UFC a long time. He's been in other organizations. Fought some really good wrestlers. He's got great takedown defense. So maybe Robbie is not out there blasting doubles on people and taking people down, but Robbie is really, really tough to take down in the environment of an MMA fight in a cage where, you push him up against the fence and he's good at defending, he's good at getting underhooks, he's good at, you take him down, scrambling back up to his feet and using the fence to get up, and someone that's got, like, great wrestling, if they haven't, put in just as much time about working on all that stuff, working on all that cage stuff, working on all that stuff it's a very, very different sport altogether. Like you can't, in collegiate wrestling, NCAA wrestling, you can't double leg someone into a wall and then rip their legs out and, be dealing with elbows at the same time. It's completely different. There's a lot of things that will help. And being a 4-time All-American and 2-time national champ definitely, has, definitely has some weight to help you in the wrestling department. But it's still not, it's not as clear case as, oh, Johnny's just going to take him down anytime he wants.
Yeah, it's a hell of a starting point, but there are a lot of things that you've never found yourself doing on the collegiate mat that you have to do, and it's called wrestling in MMA, but you don't know it as wrestling. Your sort of muscle memory doesn't know it as wrestling. Your instincts don't know it as wrestling, and we see a lot of that. We see guys who are just so decorated at the collegiate and, in some cases, international level who come into MMA and they fight guys who we don't even think of as wrestlers. I remember Jake Rochholt struggling to take down Kendall Grove. That was like the ultimate example to me of wrestling pedigree not really quickly translating, and then on the other side, the experienced MMA fighter having enough of an idea of MMA wrestling that he can make the other guys wrestling look ineffective, though they're sort of playing a different game.
The big guy that stands out to me is George St. Pierre. You know, never wrestled in college, never. I don't know if he even wrestled in high school, and he's out there taking down guys like Josh Koscheck and taking down Hughes and like all these guys that have tons and tons of wrestling experience. And he just doesn't care. He just takes them down all the same. Doesn't really matter. And not only that, but dominates. And a lot of that comes from George would do a great job. He'd be setting up his takedowns with use his jab, awesome. He'd be using kicks. He'd be using all his punches. And again, wrestlers aren't someone that's just wrestling in college is not used to dealing with the jab in the face and constantly getting hit and all this other stuff. So a guy like George St. Pierre is able to set up takedowns.
In between rounds is really fascinating, especially when the cameras are focused in this first fight here on Mark Lehman and Stephen Wright giving instructions to Johny Hendricks. Hyper-specific instruction. They can see what's working from outside the cage with a perspective that Johny Hendricks can't necessarily have in the heat of battle, and they really communicate clear instruction to him about what's working, and I think play a large role in him winning the fight, much more of a role than I think your typical corner would. And in between rounds 1 and 2, we hear Mark Lehman and Stephen Wright impress upon Hendricks that good things are happening with the jab, and you're hurting him with the low kicks, but you've got to, quote, dress it up a little better. And to you as a fighter, Joe, what does it mean to dress up the leg kick?
I think they were basically telling you got to set it up a little bit better. Like you can't just go out there and just throw a leg kick without setting it up. You got to go out there, set it up. You got to make it. You got to stick it a little bit better. I think that they just wanted him to get a little bit better mileage out of the kick. You go out there, you throw a kick, and it's okay. But when you really set it up, you really bury it. It's way more effective. You're doing 3 or 4 times the damage as you would if you go out and throw like a little half-ass one. So I think that was kind of what they were getting at.
What does set it up mean? Just a combination of punches and then behind it the kick, or could set up mean more than that?
Yeah, usually means throw a couple punches, get them thinking high. Like the classic kind of striker idea. Mentality is you throw punches, throw anything high and then go low, or you go low and then come high. You see it all the time. Guy throws a bunch of low kicks, he's really doing some good damage. And then, guys, it's getting kicked, starts reaching down or start trying, you can tell the kicks are bothering them, and then that's the time you come high. Because as they go to reach low, that kick comes high. Or vice versa. You keep throwing to the head, and then you dig to the body, and then you dig to the body a couple times. Then when their hands are dropping down, then you come to the head. It's just kind of just setting it up.
Right, setting it up so that the hand movement or the foot movement is out of place, so that you can really land with the guy being sort of not braced for it or not in a good defensive posture to see it coming. Now, on Robbie Lawler, he doesn't seem to check a lot of kicks. That doesn't seem to be something he sweats very much. And then I think of the Melvin Manouf fight, when he absolutely crowned Manouf after just a vicious diet of some of the hardest leg kicks you'll see. He's wobbled, he's almost out on his feet, but that power's still there, and he absolutely sends him sleeping. Do you think Robbie Lawler might rely too much on sort of the power of his legs or the power of his punches, that he doesn't really check leg kicks very aggressively or very closely?
Everything I've ever heard about Robbie is he's incredibly strong. So he probably is, not super worried about, getting kicked in the legs as much as he is. I've also heard that he doesn't really spar. I've heard that, he's been around for a long time. Obviously, we've talked about like head trauma and stuff like that, and how it's not good. But so he doesn't really spar. So he's probably not getting guys that are really digging kicks. He's hitting mitts a lot. I'm sure he's doing tons and tons of drilling. But it's still different, doing drilling and get kicked in the leg versus sparring and having someone really boot you in the leg over and over and over. It's probably one of those things that, I think for the Melvin Manouf fight, it was just he ran into a case of it wasn't that he neglected to train. I'm sure he trained it. It's just that the guy's like a world-class kickboxer. Yep. And one of my favorite fights ever too. Robbie's getting kicked in the leg, like his it looks like his hip or his knee is like dislocated or something. Like he can hardly put any weight on it, and then comes back. It was awesome. I think that for the Hendricks fight, the last Hendricks fight was just a case of he just wasn't prepared for it. It wasn't something Johny had shown, so we didn't really worry about it. I think that is actually going to be like one of the biggest things for this next fight is going to be that.
Yes.
I think that Robbie's going to be way more well prepared for those kicks. But now we got to see. Okay, Johny kind of kept those leg kicks up his sleeve a little bit. What else is he going to come with this time? That's going to be new that Robbie's not expecting, because I think it's a case of Johnny's definitely was thinking about the fight. Maybe a little more than Robbie was, game plan wise.
Right. And Hendricks has to know that Lawler is going to come in more prepared for the leg kicks, or at least he has to assume he will, and so he's going to give us a new look too, most likely. I mean, as a fighter, how do you prepare for that? Like, on the one hand, making sure you don't get caught with the same stuff, because that would be horrible and embarrassing and preventable, but in the same time, knowing in the back of your head, this guy's not going to come with that same approach anyway.
Well, it's kind of tough. It's easy to you have to assume that he's going to come with what he was effective with last time, so you have to get ready for it. And Johnny's going to have to assume that Robbie's getting better at it, so he's got to have some kind of extra little twist or something to work on to make it a little bit better. But it's really, really tough to be in Robbie's situation, because he's kind of letting Johny lead the fight. Now he's playing catch up a little bit. Johny won the first fight. Johny has the title. Johny was the one that came with the leg kicks, which were unexpected the first time. So now Robbie kind of has to, he's got to get ready for the leg kicks. He's got to realize that, he's got to work on them really, really hard because Johny did so well. He's got to get that title. Johny, he's already worked on all those leg kicks. He's already kind of got those. He saw that they worked well. So Johnny's going to be working on something new, and Robbie's he's stuck playing catch up. We talk all the time about how, like, whether it's a fight or it's jiu-jitsu or a boxing match or anything, it's always like a chess match. And right now, Johnny's a couple moves ahead. So everything could change like the first 30 seconds of the fight. But right now, Johnny's ahead. So Robbie's got to kind of play catch up a little bit.
One of the things we heard Mark Lehman say to Hendricks between rounds 1 and 2 is Diaz Zaromskis. When you get him on the fence and tie him up, Diaz Zaromskis. Now, a lot of times, trainers communicate with fighters because they sit down, they watch a ton of tape, they watch all the fights together, and they see at a moment in a particular fight where someone does something crafty or there's a different look, and the fastest way to get a fighter's head to that place is to just say the name of the fight. Oftentimes we do hear corners call out fight names. Now, as best I could tell, what he's referring to in the Strikeforce fight between Marius Zaromskis and Nick Diaz is the way you chop away at the thigh and the legs and the body when you have a clinch position. Not necessarily discrediting that or putting that out of your mind in search of the takedown, but doing a little damage while you're in there. I'm just curious, did Diaz Zaromskis mean anything to you, Joe?
No, I mean, I kind of took it as the same thing as you. Like he did well with the attacking the legs off the clinch, so that was kind of what I took to it too. But that's like super common with like fight camps and like that, because if his corner is like push him against the clinch, push him against the fence, clinch him, and then kick him in the leg, it's like it's really wordy. 2, you're tipping off the opponent for exactly what you're trying to do. Right. We do the same thing. We have like, I really feel like I'm like really, really good with my boxing coach Steve Mays, and like we have like terms for everything that we like to do, like the entire camp, like anything that we're gonna try to do on the fight night, we have terms for. So we'll be calling for this, or we'll be calling for that, or whatever we've been working on. Like we have like very, very short phrases for everything, and we do it. We're doing mitts, we do it. We're doing sparring, and like there's been tons of times like, okay, what are we calling this one? What are we calling that one? If we do this and then we do this, what are we doing? So it's like I honestly think that's like a huge part of like when you hear about people like jumping camps and doing all that sort of stuff. It's really tough because your terminology is all different. It's all it's not consistent across between both people. In the heat of the fight, you have to know exactly the second they say it. You have to know exactly what they're looking for, because a lot of times that window of opportunity is gone. So
it's a fascinating component. I never thought about that. You lose the language, and I'm sure, like, I think of Melvin. For some reason, I thought of Melvin Gillard right away as a guy who's always bouncing around, but who did well under Jackson and probably internalized a lot of the phraseology, right, and the shorthand, let's say, that Jackson uses to call out stuff. Yeah,
and every camp is different. Every fighter is different. Things that So Joe Proctor changed with me. He's fighting in a couple weeks on the Tough finale. So I'll have terms that are a little bit different than Proctor on some things, or like Mays will be calling out something to Proctor. I'm like, what the hell is that? Like he's talking about something. I have no idea what he's talking about.
Hit him with the Greek salad. Hit him with the Caesar salad.
Yeah, pretty much. So it's like for the most part we have like a lot of things that are common, but he has a couple combinations that he likes to throw that I don't like to throw. So he has terms for those, but then between both of us, we'll have like the same kind of call-outs, So it's easy for me to give him instruction, or him to give me instruction, or Mace to give instruction, either one of us, because those are the same. But it's a little different. It's kind of nice. I remember when I fought Kyle Bradley, and I could hear his corner calling out for stuff. When I fought Jamie Varner, I could hear his corner, screaming for, oh, lead hook, stuff like that. Like, I was kind of picking up, and when you have like very straight, calls like that, it's kind of easy for the opponent to pick up. So we kind of come up with a little bit more off the wall kind of stuff. I think it's good.
Absolutely. So in round 2 of the original Hendricks-Lawler fight, Lawler comes out moving left to right rapidly, trying to find his angles. There's a lot of head movement from Lawler, like especially compared to Johny Hendricks. His head is moving all over the place. And I wonder, as I watch Lawler try to catch angles and move his head left to right the whole time, is there value in the head movement beyond just not getting punched in the head? Does it help you set up strikes at all to not have your head still?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is not getting hit with punches. Being, you always want to be a moving target. Moving target's always tough to hit. You want to be kind of a little bit elusive. But it also it does help, because if you're going to your left, you come back with a right hand. If you're going to your right, you come back with a left hand. So it definitely does help to be able to like move your head and get a little momentum out of there. I think the big thing was that in the first round of the fight, Robbie was kind of like waiting forward, like he was slowly kind of creeping in. And I think he was expecting kind of a firefight. Like I think he expected to have to move his head a little bit, but I think that he thought that Johny was going to come forward and just kind of bomb with him. And then so now Robbie's kind of heavy on his feet, and then Johny starts kicking his legs out, and it changed everything up. So Robbie lost the first round, and because he lost the first round, now he has to change it. You can't go back and do the same thing. Like if he fought the same fight, for 5 rounds, he 1 wouldn't be walking, and 2 probably would have gotten stopped before that.
Right.
So I think the big thing was just he had to change things up. So he tried being a little more elusive. Still didn't work out that well for him. But then he started coming on a little bit later.
Something else Lawler does a lot of, and I think more so in the second round than the first, is parrying punches. Very common in boxing. We don't always see it in MMA. We kind of see guys stand at a distance, shoulder width apart, ready for takedowns and kicks and punches. We don't see a lot of guys in close enough quarters to sort of swat away punches, or for that to make a lot of sense. But we did see a lot of that in the second round, as it was clear both guys weren't necessarily going to shoot on each other at a moment's notice and were ready to go punch for punch. What about punch parrying? Is that something? It doesn't seem like something every fighter does, so I wonder if it has a lot of value in MMA, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good, but it's really dangerous. With boxing gloves on. So a lot of fighters, when they do their hard kickboxing rounds, they're wearing boxing gloves. Like almost no one is wearing small gloves when they're doing their hard MMA rounds, because guys get hurt. Like, we have enough injuries as is, and fighters are a lot smarter than people give them credit for. They're wearing good protective gear. Most guys are doing, wearing boxing gloves, and then the smart guys are always wearing boxing headgear, because it stops headbutts. It softens the punches, lets you spar really, really hard, really, really fast. And it definitely helps out quite a bit, but it hurts you a little bit, because you have these big, huge boxing gloves on, so you can get away with covering up and slipping and parrying and all this other stuff. But now you take off those big gloves, you go to smaller gloves, and now you try and do that, and you're used to hiding behind like this big, huge glove that's like the size of your head, and now you got a much smaller glove that's now like the size of an orange or something, and it's really, really tough. To kind of get the same protection. Also, they're wearing bigger gloves too, so if you have a little small hole, that glove's not going to get through. But with the smaller glove, it's definitely going to get through. So it's a little tough. Before we constantly work on doing a lot of like sparring and stuff like that. So we'll do a lot of defensive drills where I'll put on smaller gloves, and my partner will put on smaller gloves, and we'll do like very, very light, controlled sparring drills. And it's not full on sparring, but it's pretty quick pace, pretty good. Still wearing headgear, but smaller gloves, and you can't spar like that all the time, because it would get really ugly really fast. But it's really, really good for doing like defensive drills and covering up and parrying punches, things like that. We worked on it a lot before I fought Michael Johnson, and I got absolutely crushed, because I was hoping that we were going to be able to cover up and parry his punches a little bit and take away some of his punches. I got absolutely obliterated. Like, it did not work out for me at all, that fight, and it's still something we'll constantly work on. But like, that was something, like, for that particular fight camp, we put a lot of time and effort into that. And if I had been a little bit better at it, maybe it would have made a big difference for us. But because I was a little bit behind on it, I got absolutely crushed with a left hand.
Right.
So it's one of those things where you kind of have to be like, you have to cover up a little bit more. But Robbie's been around so long. He's really, really good at just dealing with all that stuff and parrying. Like when he first got in the UFC, he had great boxing, and just that's I don't know 10 years ago now, something probably more.
Yeah, 2004.
2004, yeah. So you're talking 10 years ago now. So he has a lot of experience of sparring with like those little tiny gloves, and he already had really good hands to begin with. So.
Absolutely. In the second round, we see Hendricks a lot more stationary, Lawler a lot more active, but still Hendricks is scoring one-off punches, and there's also a ton of combinations. Jab, right, uppercut, left seems to be one of his favorites in this particular round. And of course, in a Johny Hendricks fight, the threat of that left-hand power is always there. And that's the kind of thing I've heard Johny Hendricks talk about and say that, sort of first day in the gym, just as a raw wrestler trying to learn striking, it was apparent to everybody that he had power in his left. For some reason, he just had power. Can you talk about that a little bit, where power like Johny Hendricks' comes from? It's not necessarily learned. It's kind of something you can hone, but it's there or it isn't, right?
Yeah, I mean, you always talk about, some people just have thunder in their hands. Yeah. My brother's like that. Both hands, doesn't matter. Just super heavy-handed. Always like that since day one in the gym. I never really had that thunder in my hands. Like I can punch pretty hard now because I've been doing it for a while, but I can't punch like my brother, and that's how some people are. They have crazy power in their hands. I think a lot of it all comes down to just understanding like how to use your body. I think that a lot of times guys that are really heavy-handed, they're just natural athletes too. I think that they're doing everything like. Not mechanically perfect, but their body is making sense. Their body's naturally making connections from like pushing from like their toes all the way up their leg through their back all the way to that punch. I think that's kind of like the big thing. I think it's just when you're a really good athlete like that, sometimes you
have more of an instinctual understanding. Like, right, yeah, I love that point, because it's like I think a lot of people who aren't natural athletes who get into MMA will probably find themselves thinking a lot in developing power punching. Where should my foot go? Where should the power generate from? Where should I be positioned? Thinking a lot about it. Whereas fighters, athletes transitioning to MMA, you just have to tell them that. You just have to maybe explain it once, and they understand how to make their body do it. Whereas non-athletes don't always understand that.
Yep, I try to I watch my brother like boxing, so I use him as an example because he's my brother is the most talented kid you ever see in the gym, unbelievable. So I try to and we do a lot of things very, very similarly, which is good because we're able to kind of piece things together. I have a couple submission series that I really, really like, and if Danny happens to like those ones, which a lot of them we do. Then it's easy for me if I'm figuring out some new detail, some new psychology to it or something. It's easy for him to kind of adapt it and start using it too. So I try to, and some things are completely different. I'm like, oh, I like this. He's like, oh, I like this. I'm like, all right, but this is good because he's like, no, I like this, and we completely disagree on some. But for boxing stuff, he hits so much harder than me. It's not even close, and. So because of that, I try to watch him boxing. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna try to I try to do stuff that I think don't make fundamental sense, but he does it and he hits incredibly hard. So I try to do it, and it generally doesn't help me, but I give it a shot. I give it a whirl.
Right. But there's that thinking that you have to do, and it doesn't come necessarily naturally.
Yep. Whereas he doesn't give a shit. He just freaking whips that punch and just crushes people with it. I'm like, well, right. I wish I had that one. I wish I had that gift.
That's why we always pick out heavy-handed fighters, and we always make note of them, because we know that is a unique weapon that they can call upon that not necessarily every fighter can develop. That's just an advantage you have. It's just something your opponent can't really do anything about besides be very careful. Can't match it, can't develop that power to counter it, in between fight camps. It's a fascinating part of the sport, and something that I think informs the way anybody's going to fight Johny Hendricks, because that left has crushed so many solid iron chins over the course of his career and climbing to the belt that everybody's going to be wary of it. So the closing sequence on 2, it's great. You get Hendricks tuning him up from all angles with both hands, and then Lawler just rockets a left down the end that snaps Hendricks' head back as the second frame closes. And you start to get this idea that Lawler's picking up on something, or Hendricks is starting to slow down, because the punches start to land for Robbie, and he comes out a lot more confident in the third. Most folks gave Hendricks 1 and 2, Lawler 3 and 4, and then Hendricks comes through like a champion in round 5 and closes it. We didn't get a lot from Lawler's corner as far as the broadcast, but Pena was talking to him about kicking up the rhythm a little bit, and you have to be first. Don't let him be first. Do you think that's the difference we're likely to see in the rematch, Joe? Is that Lawler will not allow Hendricks to be first like he was in the first 2 frames here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so be first is like a very, very common thing in everything,
Yeah.
whether you're talking fighting, boxing, whatever. It's always better to get up, to get ahead in the round or get ahead in the match or the fight or whatever you're talking about, and let the other guy, fight to really play catch up and try to get ahead and try and constantly make it so that you're in the better position, so they kind of have to fight uphill. And I think you're going to see it out of Robbie quite a bit. I think he's going to come forward. I think he's going to be really aggressive. I think he'll be using a lot more movement early on too. I think that by the time he started moving around a lot in the second, I think the damage had already been done to his leg a little bit. Like he was already kind of feeling those. In a 5-round fight in particular, attacking the legs is a big deal because there's time for that damage to kind of set up and that leg to get stiff. Whereas in a 3-round fight, you start kicking him hard in the second, or you start doing damage in the second, but the third's over before it's really had a chance to kind of settle in and really kind of fester. But in a 5-round fight, like you start kicking, you start damaging that front leg right off the bat, like they're definitely going to feel it in the 4th and 5th. So I think that Robbie will be a little bit lighter on his feet. I think he'll be a little more aggressive. I think he did well when they were kind of fighting fire a little bit. I think another thing that was kind of unknown before was how is Johny going to take a really big punch, because Johnny's been hit a couple times, but not by someone like Robbie really. And I think that if Robbie had known that it was going to take more than like 1 or 2, I think he probably would have been a little bit longer with his combinations. So I kind of think that's going to happen too. I think we'll see some longer combinations out of Robbie for this fight.
I like that. Right, now he's got a real measure of his chin. His measure to absorb a shot might not be as kind of one-off punch oriented as he seemed to be in this fight. So he does quite well in the third, Lawler does. His left lands over and over again. He's chasing Johny around. Johny shoots a desperation takedown at one point, which Lawler prevents. And he's really catching up to him, though he is starting to slow down. Joe Rogan remarks about how it seems like Lawler's arms are beginning to get a bit heavy, and he's not quite, doesn't have the pep in his punches necessarily as we hit the third. Then we go back to the corner between rounds 3 and 4, and this is a fascinating point in the fight for me, and I got something I want to ask you about in particular. So Mark Lehman knows something's wrong. He knows something's wrong with Johny Hendricks, and maybe it accounts for why he had a rough round 3. And he tells Johny while he's sitting on the stool, whisper in my ear and tell me what's wrong. Of course, the camera still sort of picks it up, that there's something wrong with his right arm. We came to find out after the fight that Hendricks had a pretty roughed up right bicep coming into the fight. About 2 weeks out, he suffered an injury, and it acted up in this fight, and then, of course, post-fight, he gets surgery to repair a torn right bicep. So it's clearly bothering him as early as the third round and probably even earlier in the fight. Now, one thing I want to ask you, Joe, in particular, when you have an injury in between rounds and you want to communicate that to your corner, why is it important to be so secretive about it?
It's kind of weird, you know what I mean? Like, I think that people are just used to kind of protecting that kind of stuff, and not, like, it's a lose-lose situation anytime you ever bring up any kind of injury, because if Johny goes and says, oh, my right arm is really bothering me, then, when it comes out, if he had lost the fight after the fight, if he even, people are going to be asking him about it. It's like, oh, how was your right arm? They'd be like, oh, it was bothering me a little bit. And it'd be like, oh, Hendricks is making excuses. He's complaining about his arm. Like, it's kind of a lose-lose situation a little bit. At the same time, you don't want the other corner to hear, you know what I mean? Or if, oh, what's wrong? And you say something, then everyone looks down at your knee. And then if the other corner picks up on it, it's kind of like you definitely don't want them to know it, what's going on. You have to let your corner know what's going on. You got to give them as much information as possible. But it's kind of a weird situation where you don't want to let anyone else know what's going on. You don't want to let the other corner get any information that something's really bothering you, because they're gonna target it. They're gonna go right after it.
Is it possible, Joe, to completely hide even from your trainer an injury? Do you think your trainers would know you too well that they would hit you on it between rounds? Or if you can, is it worth even trying to keep it from your trainer?
I don't think it makes a lot of sense to try and keep it from your trainer. My coaches know me so well that generally if there's something bothering me, they know it. Like, I don't have to even say it. Like we'll get back out in the corner, like, oh, how's your knee, how's your elbow, how's your shoulder, how's this, how's that. Like, if something that was, maybe bothering me in camp, then they definitely knew about it, so that's always like our big thing, is like going into fights, like just dealing with, you always have like something that's, maybe it's not a big deal, but something that's a little bit sore, that's been bugging you a little bit. Maybe it's, you have a hand that's sore, or an elbow, or something. You always have something that's bothering you a little bit. It's always like a little bit of a concern during camp. So going into the fight, like that's the big thing. It's like, oh, don't let him, if he has a sore right hand, don't let him hit the top of his head. You know what I mean? Like you really want to avoid anything that's going to do further damage to it. So, like you're kind of like going into the fight, you're kind of hoping to avoid those kind of like weird little circumstances where things like that pop up. But
and maybe that accounts for why we didn't. Maybe that accounts for why we didn't see a lot of wrestling from Johny Hendricks. I mean, imagine a bicep injury would make you much more likely to try to win punch and kick, right?
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're gaming, so as a wrestler, he's like a big power wrestler. He drives people,
right.
He rips their legs out, and so now your arm is not 100%. You're not going to be as good at it. It's going to bother it. Now so it becomes a question of, okay, do you want to try and force that takedown and try to really take him down and risk making your arm worse, or do you kind of let it coast? He was doing really well on the feet. Why would you go and force that, which is gonna maybe force you to make that injury worse, as opposed to just kind of hang back and keep doing what you're doing.
It's fascinating. Now I've finally come to a point where I can ask somebody who knows this question that I always mean to ask, and then it slips into the back of my mind, and I don't remember. So what's to stop someone watching the broadcast at home in Robbie Lawler's corner from hearing Hendricks tell Lehman that there's something wrong with my right arm, and then text that information to a member of Lawler's corner?
Could 100% happen. 100%. So that's another thing, like you want to keep it quiet.
Yeah.
So technically when you're in the corner, you're not supposed to use your phone at all. You're not supposed to touch your phone. You're not supposed to text. Not that you should be texting or anything anyways. But you're not supposed to be using your phone whatsoever. You're not supposed to be using it at all. And I think that's part of the reason why. So it shouldn't happen, but it definitely could. Like I've seen guys in corners, use their phone as like a stopwatch. It's like, okay, because a lot of times you see guys like like the old school regular track stopwatch or something or whatever.
Yep.
And and the UFC is great because you can just look at the screen, you can see the time. But on like smaller shows and things like that, they don't necessarily, it's not being filmed. You don't get to see the clock. It's not the same. So I see a lot of guys, like they'll pull out their iPhone and then they run the stopwatch and they boom, and and it's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. Technically you're not supposed to do it, but no one really cares. But it's kind of meant for like bigger fights like that. Something's being televised, and like let's say he says, oh my left arm's really bothering me. He leans in and he's like, oh, my left arm's really bothering me. Like you said, the camera kind of picked up on it. Like there absolutely could have been someone, if it had been his knee, guaranteed Robbie would have started kicking that knee. Someone would have gotten a text, or someone would look at their phone, or
Yep.
Anytime I fight, I'll have legitimately like 300-400 text messages will like flood into my phone like right off the bat.
Wow.
Like pretty much by the time I'm done getting checked out by the doctor, tons of text messages where it's good or it's bad or whatever,
Wow.
And it's crazy. So like it would probably be like, I'm sure the corner's not getting texts as much, but like when Proctor fights, I probably still get 50 or 100 texts, if I'm in the corner or something. So it would be kind of rare, I think, that you have like almost like a bat line where you're texting the corner. You have one guy that's like watching the broadcast to pick up on something, is going to text the one phone you're paying attention to, but
I was suggesting like, and I take your point. I assumed, and it's good to hear you confirm that that's not allowed. That you're not allowed at UFC events to have or use your phone as a member of a fighter's corner. So that's good. I was thinking though it could get even more sophisticated, where you have like a plant. There's so many hangers-on in MMA. So many hangers-on. You look at the first 3 rows at any UFC, and if it's not a fighter, it's a hanger-on. And they could, I could easily arrange something. I don't want to name any names, but where somebody who's involved in the circle of the fighter, who is going to be close enough to cage side, can get the text and pass on word. I know it sounds very complicated and unlikely and illogical, but it would shock me if no fighter has ever tried to do that before.
Yeah, well, I'm sure people have tried to make it happen. Like it could be the same thing. Like someone's hand is really bothering them. Right? My hand's really sore. My hand's broken. Guys fight with broken hands all the time. And sometimes they'll keep punching with it, but the punch volume goes way down.
Yes.
If you know that someone's got like a messed up hand. When I fought Jamie Varner, I knew like he punched me and hit me in the top of the head. I kind of leaned down into it, hit the very top of my head, the worst spot you can punch. Really, I don't know if he broke his hand, but he really hurt his hand. And he started like he dropped down to like probably 10 or 20% of what he was doing with that right hand compared to before. It makes a big difference, and every little bit of information helps. We were talking about how close the fight was between Johny and Robbie to begin with. So now you get some. Maybe Robbie gets a little bit of insight. Oh, his right arm's bothering him. Maybe start punching at it. Maybe start kicking. Maybe start doing everything that's kind of making him use that right arm. Maybe Robbie starts trying to shoot takedowns, and now as Johnny's using that arm to pull him up, and think that maybe he makes his arm worse, and you never know.
Well, I have to say, I did notice in round 4 that Robbie Lawler began landing a lot more liberally with the left, which comes over the right arm, which in theory, if Hendricks has a hurt right arm, he'd have a little more trouble moving up quickly enough to dodge punches. And Lawler lands a lot in the 4th with the left after that communication between Hendricks and Lehman in the 3rd round, between the 3rd and 4th. Do you think if you have an injury like a bicep tear in your right arm, that's going to affect your ability to stop left punches, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's the same as like before. Like whenever you have any kind of injury, whether it's getting kicked in the leg and your footwork becomes sluggish, or getting hit in the arm and your arm gets tired, or like you see guys all the time. You talk about like gassing out and like their arms get really tired and their arms get really low and they're not as quick with it, and like they get hit with a punch and then they try to react. It's just like everything gets way slower. So I don't think it was a case of Robbie knew that his arm was bothering him, so he threw more left hands. I think it was just a case of he was throwing a left hand to begin with, and it worked and it was effective because Johny was a little bit slow with it, so he just kept going back to the well a little bit. Kept going back to what was working for him.
Absolutely. In the 4th, we see Lawler bloody up Hendricks, bloody nose. Very quickly, Johny Hendricks' right eye is a total mess. And Joe, of course, you know a bit about being bloody in a fight. When you see your own blood, do you kick into a higher gear, or do you have to sort of stay tempered, like nothing happened, and fight as if there is no blood in your eye?
So the first time I ever got cut was against Kenny Florian, and I took him down. I got elbowed a couple times in like the back of the head, and like I thought that they were gonna stop the fight, and so like I'm like wiping the back of my head. I'm like showing the camera, being like in hindsight, I was being a complete idiot. I should have just tried to stay as calm as possible. I was getting all worked up, and I complete adrenaline dump because I thought the fight was over. It was like a main event fight. I thought the fight was over, and I thought it was gonna be like a no contest or something. It was like right off the bat. And then like, all right, keep fighting. And I'm like, what? Like this is really happening? Like I thought for sure. I got a big cut in the back of my head, and it was the first time I'd ever been like really cut in a fight or anything like that. And it was really bad for me. Like really bad adrenaline dump. I thought they were gonna stop the fight. Then I fought Jeremy Stevens down in Tampa, and I got a cut up on like my hairline somewhere, and I had a lot of blood coming down, but it was kind of like it was towards the end of the fight. Like I got cut, but then I was on top. I kept landing stuff. I ended up getting him an arm lock, and by the time I realized how bad that cut was, the fight was over. So that didn't really bother me. But because of those two experiences, I learned that, dude, if you get cut, you got to relax. You got to stay calm.
Is that right? Is that right?
And that helped me a ton when I eventually fought Jim Miller, because I got a huge cut on my forehead, and like tons of blood coming down. And like I can just see, like it was almost like I was taking a shower of like blood just like dripping down my face, dripping down.
Unforgettable fight.
Yeah, it was definitely one to remember. But I really feel like that helped me a ton. Like I had been there, so I think that everyone's gonna react differently. Like I don't think I was that different of a person from like the first fight to the last fight, but I think that just because I had been through that a couple times, I stayed calm. And I think that me staying calm and me being so positive about it was the only reason I let that fight go. My last fight was against Mike Chiesa, and he got a big cut on his eyebrow. And they were feeling the cut, and he was like pulling away, and wasn't being, they kept trying to check, and he kept like looking away from them, and they're like, you know what, screw this guy, he's not being very cooperative. Fight's over, he's done. Whereas I was like, okay, here, look at the cut. No, I feel good. Like you want to continue? Yes, I want to continue. I think being like very, very positive about it, is why they're like, oh yeah, I mean he feels good. He's acting fine. He's not concussed. He wants to keep going. Yeah, we'll let that keep going. And nice. I think that mindset helped me out a ton. Now I don't know if Johny had been cut prior. Like I don't remember. I don't ever remember him being bloody. So I think that that was fortunate for Robbie, the fact that he busted him up, and he had him bleeding so much. I think that a second time he's going to be better prepared for it. He didn't seem to freak out the first time anyways, so I think he handled it well. But I think that just having had it happen a couple times, I think helps. I don't think like the Diaz brothers get cut all the time. They just have a lot of scar tissue on their face, and I don't think that they ever see their own blood and they start freaking out. I think they're as cool as can be.
Yep. Now, conversely, the other side of that coin, if you're a fighter who opens a cut on your opposition, and this is to the Chiesa fight as well, you go right for it, right? I mean, I'm sure Lawler, when he saw that blood, his thought is, got to punch that cut as much as I can.
Absolutely. For me in the Chiesa fight, like I that was a huge cut. Like I knew it was over, so I kind of almost like backed off a little bit. Like I wanted, if I kept throwing punches and I kept the exchange going, the ref doesn't really have an opportunity to jump in. The ref likes to jump in when there's like a lull in the action. So I kind of backed off a little bit,
right,
to give the ref some time. Chiesa came forward a little bit. I threw some punches. I moved back. I threw some punches. I moved back. Eventually, I started coming forward. I put a lot of space between us and started coming forward, and then the ref jumped in. So it's definitely it's generally one of those things where you definitely want to start pouring it on, unless you deem that that's like a really bad cut. That's a fight-ending cut. In my case, I wanted to just look. I was like, this fight is won. It's over. I just have to not let him get lucky, to let him not cut me back or knock me out or anything like that, and we're good. But for the most part, usually it's like get after it. The second you see any kind of blood, you always talk about like blood in the water. It's like blood on the mat is just as good. You want to go at him.
I like that. So in between, at the end, we see Lawler start to go to the body. He lands a huge left uppercut. Hendricks answers with a salvo. Round 4 is over. So it's 2-2 at this point, I think, in most fans' eyes. So in between rounds 4 and 5, we hear Lehman mention to Hendricks that Lawler only comes on strong in the first minute. After that, he's fading, and you need to get super focused in that first minute and get hit him up and clinch. So I wanted to ask, when you get that about a fight, does that happen to you where it's like the first minute is all that matters? Like, I need to force myself to be super focused in just the first minute and I'll be fine. Does that remind you of any particular fight, or does that sound familiar to you coming into a round with that mindset?
Well, for me, I think I fight like a maniac sometimes. I'm very like methodical in like what I'm doing, and like what we game plan for and stuff like that. But when it comes to actual execution, I am hyper aggressive. So I come forward. I used to like the longest time. Like I used to talk about how like I was like really dangerous like the first round, the first couple minutes of a round, and then I would kind of lose steam and kind of go off. And part of that was because I used to hold my breath. I would legit be like holding my breath almost the entire fight, be like, throwing as much as I can and like holding my breath the entire time. And once we got that squared away, my cardio issues seemed to go away. So it's definitely there's a lot of guys that are kind of they do the same thing. Like I'm definitely not the only person that holds my breath. Like we tell people all the time, like, and that's like across the board for all of our guys that fight, whether it's our amateurs or it's our guys like Joe Proctor in the UFC. It's like like one of our biggest cues is always breathe. You know what I mean? Like we're screaming, breathe, breathe, breathe. Like especially a minute or so in, because you kind of have all that tension where like you want to you're like, all right, here we go, and you're getting ready, you're getting prepared, and you kind of forget to breathe sometimes. So that's like one of the things that we're always don't lose position and breathe are like the two big things, especially when there's like a little lull. Usually like right off the bat. Sometimes there's a feeling out process and there's some kind of big exchange. It's pretty much how every fight ever will go. So it's always important, like right after that first exchange, remind people to breathe and relax. And I think that Lehman was kind of just picking up on that. The Johny's very much the same. Like he comes out hard and fast and aggressive, and then he kind of slows down a little bit.
Yeah, he was saying Lawler was doing that you really only have to worry about him for the first minute. So if you're really keenly defensive minded in that first minute, you'll be fine. And if he does catch you with a punch, this is of course after Lawler was really tuning him up in the fourth, clinch right away, clinch. And that was different than how we saw Hendricks react to punches earlier in the fight. So is that sometimes the strategy? Like, early on, I'm going to exchange punches with him, but if he starts to get ahead of me in that department, then it's clinch all day as soon as I feel his leather on my face.
Yeah, I mean, you always want to keep the fight where you have the advantage. So if you're, the fight starts on the feet, so you see how it goes. If it's not going well on the feet, you got to change things up. So it could be shooting a takedown, taking them down. Could be getting into a clinch. Could be getting closer to them. Could be, maybe it's circling way out and away and working some kicks.
So you cede that ground. You don't say to yourself, "Oh, I'm going to come back at him. He thinks he's going to catch up to me on the feet. I'm coming back." You cede that ground and shift. Say, "All right, he's winning there."
You got to change gears. You can't just keep doing the same thing. Like that's like really frustrating to me sometimes when you see a guy that's like he's clearly losing a decision and then he doesn't change the game plan up.
Right.
And maybe it's because he's stubborn. Maybe he thinks he's going to make it a war of attrition and he's just going to overcome the other guy. Maybe he thinks he's honestly winning. Maybe he thinks he's doing well and he's winning and it's going his way. And it's kind of frustrating sometimes. But It's just the way it goes sometimes.
Yep.
But I'm a big fan of you got to change things up. You got to change something. It doesn't have to be like a super incredibly drastic change, but you have to change things up somehow.
That's exactly what Hendricks does to cinch the fight, and it really was a championship caliber performance in that way, in terms of making adjustments and being smart about how you're going to keep your title, or win the title. Of course, this was to crown the champion after George St. Pierre had vacated, the first new welterweight title holder since 2008. So he comes out in the fifth, and he fakes a takedown early. He ends up shooting the outside leg. He gets Lawler up against the fence. You hear Lehman go back to that Diaz-Zaromskis call at cage side, and then he begins working the thigh and other things. Lawler sprawls. Hendricks comes up swinging off the sprawl, and it's a much more of a wrestling match, much more of a clinch affair in the fifth round. And Hendricks then starts to land the lefts, and Lawler starts to slow down. And then as soon as we start to see Lawler kind of wilt a little bit, his shoulders kind of sink, he doesn't quite look as cocked and ready to fire, Lawler hits that Hendricks hits that takedown. And it's like one of the most crucial takedowns in any UFC title fight. I mean, that is a true fight-winning takedown. Joe, people rag on fighters for closing rounds out with takedown attempts or trying to steal rounds with takedown attempts. But that was one where nobody ripped Johny Hendricks for that. Nobody ripped him for disengaging as far as the firefight went. That was like brilliant strategy and one of the more beautiful takedowns I've ever seen, just because of how it won him the fight, and how smart it was to go for.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. One of the things one of my coaches, Joe Pomfret, says to us all the time, it's like the best advice. It's so simple, it's so ridiculous, but he always says it. He's like, it's going to be a fight. There's going to be punches. There's going to be kicks. There's going to be knees, there's going to be elbows, there's going to be takedowns, there's going to be submissions. He's like, it's going to be a fight. Don't let anything catch you off guard. And it seems like of course there's going to be punches, of course there's going to be kicks, of course all these things are going to happen, but like it really kind of lets you think about the fact that like, okay, nothing is going to happen is going to bother us. We're going to be ready for anything that comes our way. We got this. And it was 100%, and everything happened in that fifth round. Like they were throwing punches, kicks, knees, elbows, like everything was coming. They're both trying to murder each other. They're both really tired, and like you said, like no one's gonna complain about shooting that takedown. Like it was the smartest thing you could do. I think that showed that was like the smartest Johny Hendricks moment I've seen in any of his fights. Most of his fights he comes kind of lumbering forward, blasting left hand after left hand after left hand. And this time it was like, maybe he saved up that bicep for that one good takedown attempt, at the end when it really mattered. Maybe he was, maybe he gave up the third and fourth a little bit so he could win the fifth. Like, oh, my arms really bother me. I won the first two. I'm going to kind of coast and I'm really going to bring it in the fifth. And you never know. You'd have to ask him, but I thought it showed a lot of fight IQ.
And one of the things he does masterfully is immediately tie up the legs. Immediately after getting Lawler on the canvas up against the cage, tie up the legs with his own legs. We talked about half guard a lot last time we were doing the show in terms of Frankie Edgar damaging Cub Swanson, and it's just you can't extract your leg when the guy on top has you pinch that tight. And I'd imagine that was key too, because not only did Hendricks get the takedown, but his immediate instinct was to make it position himself such that it would be almost impossible to get up, especially that deep into a fight. I remember that feeling. As soon as he scissored up those legs after the takedown, I'm like, Lawler, even if he wanted to, he doesn't have the reserves to pull his legs free, let alone stand back up.
Yeah, that's a really tough position to get out of. So the big thing there was, so a lot of times we talk about you're in kind of half guard or whatever. You want to control that leg so they can't pull that leg out from under them. What Hendricks did, which was great, was he stepped his right leg over the top and had it under both of Robbie's legs. So picture this, lay against the wall, put your back in the wall, put both your legs out straight, and try to get up without moving your legs. It's like impossible. There's no way that you can ever get out. And that's he was working with Mark Lehman, and Mark Lehman was actually one of his fighters, like, I don't know, like maybe like 8 years ago was like the first time I ever saw someone doing that, was stepping over both the legs like that and controlling the legs. And it's like, it's such a good, smart thing to do. It's one of those things where it's like you're not going to do tons of damage there. You can throw some punches, but it's really, really good for stopping someone that's trying to scramble back up. And that was what Johny needed at the time. It was the perfect thing to do. And he did it great. Hit his takedown, locked him up. There was like a minute and a half left in the fight, and there was no way Robbie was going anywhere. It was a great move.
It was, and it was a perfect punctuation to one of the more important takedowns we've seen ever in a UFC title fight. And very fascinated to see what, in this great detailed breakdown of 5 rounds from UFC 171, changes. So to close out, Joe, as we look ahead to Saturday's main event between Hendricks and Lawler. Part 2, what do you think? If you had to place a wager on what Lawler is most likely to change and what Hendricks is most likely to change, what would they be?
So I think that Robbie's going to be better prepared for the leg kicks. I think that Johny's probably going to wrestle a little bit more. The big question mark for me is going to be how is Johny's arm? You know, like what's going on there? Because I know I've had I've had ACL surgery, I've had meniscus surgery, I've had all these other kind of surgeries, and it's like even like a year later, it's a lot of times it's not 100%. Like it's very, very good. You're not worried about it being hurt as much. Like you're 100% like as far as like health wise, but you're not the same as you were before. So I'm interested to see kind of how Johny does. You know, and maybe he's been killing it. Maybe he just that doesn't bother him at all, and you know, maybe he's gonna come out and just be an absolute animal. But I'm kind of interested to see how he's using that arm and kind of seeing how that all plays out. That's what I'm most looking forward to.
Co-sign on everything, and any closing messages, Joe, for the fans as far as getting in touch with us and thoughts and comments?
Nope. You know, keep getting to us on Twitter. This is I think this is episode 4.
Yep.
So we've done a couple episodes. If you want to check out the past ones, definitely go do that. We're gonna try to put out a new video every Sunday. Even we were talking about it the other day. We were gonna try and do it like after I fight and after Proctor fights and stuff like that. You know, we'll kind of see. It'll be, you know, it might have to be a game time decision if we actually get them out. But we're gonna try to, you know, kind of keep things right on track schedule wise. And you know, like we're gonna have growing pains. We're kind of figuring this out as we go. We just decided that, you know, the best way to learn how to do it is just do it. So hopefully you guys like it. But we love hearing feedback. I know there's been a couple times I've forgotten to like flip the image on the computer, so like things are backwards or whatever. But things are gonna happen. But it's okay. I think the content still gets there. It may not be the best presentation, but the presentation will get better as we go.
Yes. If you don't appreciate that, then I just don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
So we'll be back for episode 5 of the Lowdown, taking a look at what ultimately ends up happening in Hendricks versus Lawler 2, one of the more exciting fights here of 2014. And we will see you then. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
All right.